I got pregnant with the boss's kid and will soon become his wife. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Michelle, my husband's mistress, had been mocking me, showing off her youth and trying to prove she was better than me. She even took my job as the president's secretary, and now she wants my husband too. I decided I wouldn't hold back anymore. I was determined to make them both suffer. I signed the divorce papers that Scott gave me, but I got a lot of money in return. Scott and Michelle got married in France with a grand ceremony. A week later, I got a call from Michelle. "Hey, Scott hasn't come home. As his ex-wife, you must know where he is, right?" Michelle's voice was frantic. I laughed maliciously. Just as I had expected, I kept quiet, but I exposed Scott's terrible secrets. My name is Kelly. I'm 61 years old and work as the president's secretary at my husband Scott's company. Every day, I wake up at 7 a.m., earlier than my husband, to prepare breakfast. Then I go to work alone, tidying up and cleaning the president's office to make sure Scott works comfortably. At 9 a.m., Scott arrives at the office. "Thank you, Kelly, you cleaned again today," he says. I approach him and retie his tie. "It's fine, dear. You want to work in a clean room, right?" I reply, "That's right," he answers. Scott and I were introduced by an acquaintance. We haven't had children, but we've lived together, supporting each other for 31 years. The company, taken over by Scott from his father-in-law, is stable, and I've had no complaints about our life. By the way, the new business you planned, Johnny is going to fund it. The transfer was confirmed earlier, Scott tells me. "That's great. John seems to like you." "Your negotiating helped a lot," I respond. The company is run by Scott as the president and his brother, Johnny, as the chairman. Scott calls him John. "Remember, Johnny funded another business you planned before. Aren't you proceeding with that?" I ask. I casually asked Scott, and he looked annoyed. "It's fine, I'll handle it." "Nothing special on today's schedule, right?" he said. "Yes, because you mentioned it before," I replied. Scott smiled contentedly. "Good, good. Then, Kelly, there's someone I want to introduce to you. I'll bring them here, so wait for me." "Understood," I said, feeling uneasy about his words. Soon, I heard laughter from the hallway, Scott's voice and another, younger woman's voice. As I wondered about their friendly demeanor, the office door opened. "Kept you waiting, huh, Kelly?" Scott said, looking pleased, but I was too focused on the woman sitting next to him to respond. She was very young, with long, neatly arranged hair. She wore a miniskirt that revealed her thighs and a camisole that exposed her chest. It was like she was dressed for a night out, but she wore it confidently. I was astounded by her youth. "This is Michelle. She'll be working here from today," Scott said. "Nice to meet you," Michelle added. I was dumbfounded. Was this a joke? My husband introducing a young woman to me was hard enough to handle. Moreover, we don't hire fresh graduates. "Excuse me, but how old is Michelle?" I asked. "She's 24. I met her at a bar with friends. We hit it off. She's young and fresh and gives me energy. Don't you think she'll boost the morale of our employees?" "Ah, yes," I managed to say, seeing my husband's radiant expression. "Then, Kelly, please teach Michelle the ropes." "Michelle is going to work as a general employee, right? Then wouldn't it be better if—" I started. "Oh, I forgot to mention, we're going to have 2 secretaries from now on. So please teach Michelle the secretary work." "2 secretaries? Is that necessary?" I asked, feeling a pang in my heart. "Well, you're getting on in years. It's okay to pass on work to the younger ones." Scott laughed lightly, and it hurt. "The way you say it," I thought to myself. "Then take care. I'm going out for a bit on a personal errand. I'm counting on you to show her the ropes." With that, Scott left Michelle and me alone in the office. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Once Scott decides on something, he tends to rush into it and often regrets it later. This has happened many times throughout our marriage. It's useless to argue at times like this. For now, I'll just do as he says. It's bound not to work out anyway. Hey, Kelly, Michelle tapped my shoulder. Yes, I replied. How old are you, Kelly? She asked. It felt wrong not to answer after asking her age. I told her the truth. I'll be 61 this year, but my sincere feelings didn't reach Michelle. What? You're as old as my grandmother. Poor thing, you could die any time and yet you still work. That's kind of sad, she said. I gave a wry smile. I like my job. It's not sad. Oh, I see. The sad one is the boss, right? Whether he's at home or at work, he's always with an old woman. Really poor thing. With each word, my face grew more strained. What exactly are you trying to say? You don't get it. I guess when you get older, your brain starts to slow down. Michelle let out a big sigh and said clearly, being young and beautiful, I have higher status than an old lady like you. You understand, right? Her smile was full of confidence, and I shivered. I couldn't stay silent any longer. You know, you should learn some common sense. Did I make you angry? Is it menopause? She asked. You get angry so quickly. It must be hard to keep working if you get upset over such things. Plus, with menopause, you sweat a lot and get short of breath, right? It's embarrassing to try so hard. Maybe it's time for you to retire. As I stood there, dumbfounded, Michelle laughed and whispered in my ear, Why don't you retire as president's wife too? I shuddered. This person intended to take Scott away from me. I couldn't help but raise my voice. Enough is enough. With that kind of intention, I can't teach you anything. Leave the company right now. I expected a quarrel, but Michelle looked at me with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get along with you, Kelly, and made a joke, but it was too much. Too much. Michelle collapsed to the floor, sobbing like the heroine of a tragedy. I'll leave this company. Thank you for everything. Michelle ran out of the room. What is happening? Overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, I stood there dumbfounded until Michelle returned with a red-faced Scott in tow. What are you doing? His sudden yell made me tremble. What's wrong, dear? I heard from Michelle you yelled at her. It's because she said something terrible. Don't lie. I've been listening to your conversation. Michelle had recorded our argument on her mobile phone. The recording started from the moment I scolded Michelle, giving the impression that I suddenly blamed her without reason and made her cry. That's why she apologized so sincerely, sobbing and all. I bit my lip in frustration. You don't believe me. Believe Michelle. She came to me crying about what you did. There's a recording. It's clear whose words have more credibility. A secretary who bullies employees is fired as of today. I couldn't believe it. I had always supported Scott both at home and at work. Now he was abandoning me for Michelle, who just joined the company. Wait, then who will do the secretary's job? I asked. It's decided. Michelle will do it, Scott said. That's impossible. And what about you? I swallowed the words that almost slipped out and tried again in a way only Scott and I would understand. You know about your hobby. I'll handle that myself. I prefer pure and cute Michelle over you, who lies to me. Besides, a young and beautiful girl like her suits me better than you do, don't you think? Scott narrowed his eyes happily and looked at Michelle beside him. She looked up at Scott with adoration and flashed a brilliant smile. Then she turned to me and stuck out her tongue just a little. I protested to Scott many times, but he wouldn't listen. The job of a secretary is not easy, despite my insistence that Michelle couldn't handle it. All I got back were his overly optimistic words, saying it was an exaggeration or you won't know until you try. He must have thought he was a knight protecting his princess. I was speechless at his foolishness, hardly what you'd expect from someone running a company. Eventually, Scott threw out my personal items from my workspace. Instead, he arranged a brand new desk and cute stationery for young people, all for Michelle. It was all in vain. Realizing this, I decided not to waste any more effort and left the company. However, Scott didn't come home that night. He didn't return my calls either. I thought it was just his way of getting back at me, but as a week, a month, and then 5 months passed, I grew anxious. One day, I was called to the company by Scott and was heading to the president's office. Maybe he finally understood how hard the secretary's job was and decided to let Michelle go and call me back. I knocked on the president's office door with a sliver of hope. "Come in," Scott said. As I opened the door, I was met with an unbelievable scene. Scott, smiling happily, was holding hands with Michelle beside him. The two of them looked at me and laughed joyously. "It's been a while, Kelly. We have some big news today," Scott said. "What is it?" I asked. Actually, then Michelle put her hand over Scott's mouth. "Let me say it, okay? I want to thank the wife, right?" Scott nodded deeply, and Michelle said to me with a beaming smile, "We're getting married. Thank you for everything you've done for Scott." "What?" In front of my shaking self, Scott laughed sheepishly. "No," I thought. "There's no point in hiding it. I'm thinking of starting a second life. You're getting too old. It's better for you to live quietly by yourself." "What? How dare you?" I felt as if all the blood had drained from my body. "Wait a minute, Kelly, the talk isn't over yet. Here, a present," Michelle said, handing me a few sheets of paper. They were printed with black and white photos. Seeing them made me feel sick. "This ultrasound. Don't tell me," I started. Michelle nodded slowly and gently stroked her belly as she came closer and whispered in my ear, "I got pregnant with Scott's child. I'll be taking over as the president's wife," she laughed. At that moment, something inside me snapped. She had mocked me, flaunted her youth, and tried to assert her superiority at every turn. She even took my job as the president's secretary, and now she's aiming for Scott. Well, I won't hold back anymore. I'll make sure they both suffer. I signed the divorce papers that Scott handed me. Of course, I received a hefty compensation. They had a grand wedding in France. Things changed a week later when I got a call from Michelle. "Hey, Scott hasn't come home. As his ex-wife, you must know where he is, right?" Michelle's voice was frantic. I laughed maliciously. Just as I had expected, I kept quiet for a moment, then said, "Scott is probably in San Jose right now." "San Jose? Ever heard of it? There's this big hotel in San Jose with a casino. Scott always rushes there whenever he has a chance," I explained. Michelle gasped. "Does that mean?" "Yes, Scott is probably indulging in gambling right now." I was the one who carefully scheduled his time to prevent him from getting too involved. It seems the new secretary was kept in the dark. He didn't want to show his bad side, spending the money he earned on gambling. Michelle was silent, seemingly in shock. I let out a small laugh. "I'm actually thankful to you." "What?" Michelle asked. "Scott started getting into gambling these past few years. It seems someone from a new business partner invited him," I said. "And what about it?" she asked. "Before you came along, there was still a bit of affection left in Scott. I was worried about him falling deeper, but now I've completely cut him off. Taking such a low man off my hands, and even giving me a hefty compensation, there couldn't have been a better opportunity. Thanks to you, I can enjoy my second life." I laughed heartily. I could hear Michelle breathing heavily over the phone. "Don't you dare joke about this," she shouted. "Goodbye. You have a tough road ahead as the president's wife," I said. I said sarcastically and hung up on Michelle, ignoring her shouting from the other end. A few days later, as I was relaxing in my new condo, the doorbell rang. Could it be a delivery? I haven't ordered anything, I thought, feeling suspicious. I looked through the peephole and saw my ex-husband, Scott, his face red with anger. "You're there, aren't you, Kelly? How dare you tell Michelle about the gambling?" Understanding the situation, I decided to let Scott in. He must have hired a detective to find my address. Running away now would only lead to him chasing me again. I might as well settle things here. I had important information to share with him. I prepared a clear file of documents before opening the door. It's been a while, hasn't it? I greeted him with a graceful smile. What do you mean, it's been a while? After you ruined my family, how can you still smile? Scott was furious, shouting and trying to intimidate me, but such tactics didn't work on a wife of many years. Why are you so red-faced? What happened? It's none of your business, he snapped. I chuckled. He came here just to vent his anger, but I could see through what had happened between them. You must have had a fight with your wife. Shut up. Michelle must be unhappy with most of your income going to gambling. She told you she would manage the finances, and you're on an allowance now, right? Scott froze in shock. How? How do you know that? Did you plant a bug or something? He asked seriously, and I burst into laughter. You did the same thing with me when your gambling came to light. You said, "What's wrong with spending the money I earned on my hobby?" You must have repeated the same with Michelle, leading to a fight, and now you're taking it out on me. Scott clenched his fists and fell silent. Don't underestimate a wife of 31 years, I thought to myself, seeing his frustrated face. You should be thankful I managed your schedule as your secretary. I minimized your gambling time to save you from ruin. Can a naive 25-year-old do that? Well, he started. You have no choice but to let her try. You're having a child after all. At that word, Scott's face lit up. Yes, Michelle and I are having a child. Unlike you, who's infertile, she can give me an heir. You lost as a woman. Scott looked down on me triumphantly. That's great for you. We're happy, I said. Don't try to ruin my family again. I came here to warn you today. Scott pointed at me, saying so. I tilted my head, puzzled. Me ruin it? I have no such intention. In fact, I'm thinking of helping you. Help me? Scott looked confused. Did you go with Michelle to the gynecologist? Huh? That place is for women. Michelle said she wanted to go alone, so I didn't go with her. You saw the ultrasound photo, right? The glossy, thick photo paper. No, the one I saw was just thin, regular paper. I thought so, I said, presenting Scott with several photos from a clear file. They were grainy black and white ultrasound images. Scott's eyes widened. What? You're pregnant? Of course not. This was a gift from Michelle. She's quite prepared, isn't she? Printing these out from the internet for me. Internet? Scott looked puzzled. I handed him a piece of paper. It was a printout of a blog post from 3 years ago, a pregnancy announcement with ultrasound photos. Compare this with the photo Michelle showed you. Notice anything? Scott looked back and forth between the photo and the article. His face turned pale. You don't mean? That's right. The copied photo from the article matches Michelle's ultrasound photo. Holding them up to the light, the baby silhouette matches perfectly. Do you know about image search? It's a feature that searches the internet for images similar to the one you have. I found this blog using it. She must have copied the article directly, cutting out the photo neatly. So the child, Scott went pale, looking like he might collapse. I decided it was time to deliver the final blow. It's a lie. There's no baby. Scott collapsed to his knees. No, that can't be. She wouldn't lie about something like that. Impossible. After everything I bought for her designer clothes, bags, even an expensive engagement ring. Scott vented his confused emotions by repeatedly hitting the floor with his fist. His actions were so ridiculous I couldn't help but smile. It's a shame you couldn't become a father. Considering your age, it's doubtful you could have fathered a child. Thinking a young partner would guarantee a child was naive. Ask Michelle for the truth. I'll call her over now. Scott was too drained to argue. He just slumped there, silent. I had Michelle come to the condominium. Soon after, the doorbell rang, and I opened the door. Upon seeing me with Scott, she screamed. What are you doing here? Trying to take Scott back from me? No. Didn't I say I was thankful to you? I have a baby in my belly. You can't tear us apart. Michelle screamed triumphantly. Not listening to me, she entered and gently embraced Scott's shoulder. Are you okay? Let's go back and talk about the money, she said. I'll manage the finances. That's okay, right? We'll overcome this together. After all, I'm carrying our child, Michelle said. Shut up. Scott slowly stood up, looking at Michelle intently. The pregnancy is a lie, isn't it? Michelle's face contorted. What are you talking about, honey? Tell me the truth, Michelle. The pregnancy is real. I showed you the ultrasound photo. Our child is the fruit of our love. How can you deny that? Michelle sat on the floor, crying, then glared sharply at me. You must have filled his head with weird ideas. You're just jealous because you're old and I'm young and beautiful. I laughed. Is that all you have to say? Hey, Scott, let's just go home, okay? Michelle tried to pull Scott's arm, but he brushed her off. Enough, Michelle. Scott thrust the blog post copy and the ultrasound photo at her. There's no escaping the truth now. I trusted you. How could you lie about something like this? I was so happy I cried. Michelle's expression changed. Hey, Scott. She looked at me with wet eyes, seeking sympathy. I just wanted to test your love for me. I was afraid I was just being played with. That's why I said I was pregnant. Then, Scott, you said you wanted me to have it, right? I was so happy. Michelle's radiant smile left Scott speechless. So the lie was because you love me. That's right. We can start working on having a child now. My beauty and your brains will make a wonderful child who'll eventually become a president and earn lots of money. That's not going to happen, I said, bringing Scott and Michelle back to reality. Hey, we're having a moment here, Michelle snapped. Do you really think this man has money? Of course, he's a president after all. I see. Our company has been passed down through generations and isn't doing badly, but that's about the company as a whole. This man is a gambler. Do you understand what that means? Michelle's face turned pale as she clung to Scott. Hey, Scott, you're rich, right? You told me once we're married we live a wealthy life because you have more money than you know what to do with. Scott responded in a faltering voice. It's okay. I've lost some money gambling, but we're starting a new business soon. That'll be our big break. What are you talking about? I pointed out Scott's ugly lies. I know for a fact there's no new business venture planned. What do you mean? You got funding from Johnny recently, right? Where's that money now? Surely it wasn't spent on luxury brands and an engagement ring for a new wife. I glared at Scott. What? That's not something I would do. Scott laughed derisively, though his voice trembled. I sighed briefly. You embezzled the company's money, I said. Scott swallowed hard under my steady gaze. I had suspicions. You've been saying you're starting new ventures and getting funding from Johnny, but no business ever materializes. Just one new venture after another. It was odd not to doubt, so I spoke with Johnny to gather solid evidence. You teamed up against me. The money John transferred that day was a decoy. You transferred the business funds directly into your own bank account this time. Usually you're more careful, using various accounts to avoid detection. Were you that desperate for money, trying to prove to Michelle you're wealthy? Scott fumbled for words, confirming my suspicions. I said the last word, you're done. Get arrested and live as a criminal for the rest of your life. Shut up. It's a family matter. It'll probably just end with probation. Besides, John will bail me out. Even if I'm charged, I'll be out in no time, Scott reassured himself. How do you know all this? You were supposed to be fired. You have nothing to do with this. Johnny told me. John did? Yeah, it's me. Johnny hired me. Scott opened his mouth in surprise. I explained calmly, yes. When he heard you dumped me, he contacted me immediately. He apologized for your terrible actions and asked if he could hire me back. I said yes right away. You didn't know. John is keeping it from me. That bastard. I'm grateful to Johnny. He put me in charge of schedule management, and I'm earning more than before. I showed a broad smile, and Scott gritted his teeth. That John. I'll confront him right now, Scott said as he was about to leave. That's when it happened. Michelle grabbed Scott's arm and pulled him towards her with strength, their faces almost touching. Her expression was devilish. Hey, you lied to me, flaunting your wealth. In reality, you're just an old criminal. Don't mess with me. I'm sorry, Michelle, Scott said, terrified, taking Michelle's hand and looking into her eyes. He slowly said, but it's okay. I'll probably get probation and I can return home. I might be out of the company, but we can still be happy without money if we're together. Don't joke with me. Michelle shook off Scott's hand and glared at him as if he were trash. There's no way a beautiful young woman like me would live with an old, penniless man like you. I lied about being pregnant to get us to marry. What a waste of time. The worst. Michelle shoved Scott aside and left the room. Michelle, wait for me, Scott called out, but Michelle shut the door behind her. He stood at the entrance like a ghost. I spoke to Scott. Please leave. This is my house. Kelly, can't we start over? Me as the president and you as the secretary like before? Scott tried to charm me with a smile, but I flatly rejected him. It's impossible. I hate you. I never want to see your face again. Scott's eyes widened, and he started to tremble. Enough of that, I said, opening the door and pushing him out. I locked the door and began watching TV. Scott quietly left, realizing it was all over. Later, Scott was arrested. He thought Johnny would bail him out, but that was wrong. He was taken to a cold jail cell alone. Scott was arrested for embezzling funds entrusted to him by Johnny. Besides, he had told suppliers and related companies he was starting new ventures, asking for loans, and then diverting those funds to his personal account for private use. Scott received a sentence without probation and won't be out for several years. As for Michelle, she was suspected of conspiring with Scott and was investigated. Though no evidence of conspiracy was found, the police discovered she had been skimming money from various businessmen, approaching wealthy-looking men in bars, becoming their girlfriend, and then claiming she needed money for a pregnancy or a parent's surgery. Essentially, Scott was also a victim of Michelle's scams. Michelle was arrested for fraud. Both of them ended up in the care of the police. Half a year has passed since Scott's arrest. I am still working with Johnny, trying to recover the company's image. It's not easy, and Johnny is always worried. I want to support him, feeling grateful to him. One evening, I returned to the company with Johnny. He sank deeply into his chair and exhaled. It's been a tiring day. We had a series of business dinners. Johnny looked into my eyes and smiled. Ah, but thanks to you, Kelly, for picking a good restaurant. We had an enjoyable meal. Many of the clients are around my age, so they appreciated the healthy yet luxurious dining experience. Plus, none of them knew about today's place. It was like a surprise. Thanks to that, the conversation flowed well. Thank you. Johnny wore a gentle smile. Unlike Scott, Johnny is always calm and composed. When he speaks with someone, he always uses polite language, and his sincere character is evident. I find Johnny's personal charm appealing. It's too kind of you to say, I replied. I thanked him. Johnny sighed contentedly. To think someone as capable as you was Scott's spouse is truly surprising. I chuckled lightly. Former spouse. I have no relation with him anymore. Right, he said. By the way, Kelly, how long do you plan to work? Don't you think about retiring and living quietly at home? I answered with a smile. I love my work. As long as I'm physically able, I want to keep working. Johnny nodded happily. I want you to help me rebuild this company. It's going to be a long partnership, but I'm counting on you from now on. I nodded firmly. Yes, Johnny. Johnny laughed, amused. Seeing his laughter made me feel warm inside. My second life is surely going to be enjoyable. Looking at Johnny's smile, I thought just that. My name's Mary, and life took a tough turn when I was just 10. My dad had been sick for a while, but I didn't really understand what was going on until he was gone for good. One day he was there, and the next day, there was just an empty seat at the dinner table. It didn't take long for my mom to fill that empty space. 2 months later, she brought home Jack. I guess she felt lonely and needed someone fast. Jack moved in like he owned the place, and it was clear he didn't want me around. Mary, this is Jack. Jack, this is my daughter Mary. Mom introduced us the day he moved in. Jack looked at me coldly, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Hi, I managed to say, feeling shy but trying to be polite. Jack just nodded, not even smiling. He turned to Mom. Linda, can we talk about the living arrangements? I remember feeling a chill as they walked away, his hand on her shoulder. It didn't take long before I started feeling like an outsider in my own home. Jack had rules for everything and was always on my case. Don't leave your stuff in the living room. Eat faster. Don't make too much noise. It was nonstop. Mom just went along with whatever Jack said, her eyes looking empty or maybe just tired. One evening at dinner, things boiled over. I accidentally knocked over a glass of water, and it spilled towards Jack. Clumsy kid, can't you do anything right? Jack snapped, jumping up as the water splashed on his pants. Sorry, Jack, it was just an accident, I stammered, feeling my face heat up. Sorry doesn't clean up messes, Mary. Be more careful, he scolded, his voice louder than it needed to be. Mom just sat there, quietly dabbing her mouth with a napkin, not saying anything. I looked at her, hoping she would say something, anything, to stand up for me, but she stayed silent. I heard them arguing in their room. Jack's voice was loud and harsh. Linda, that kid of yours needs to shape up. I'm not going to live in chaos just because you're used to it. Mom's reply was soft, but I could catch bits of it. Jack, please, she's just a child. She's still adjusting. Adjusting? It's been months. I'm telling you, if things don't change, I didn't hear the rest, but I didn't need to. The message was clear. Jack wanted me out of the way, and Mom wasn't fighting too hard against it. The next few months were just as hard. Jack's complaints were a daily thing, and Mom's silence grew heavier. I was walking on eggshells, trying not to make a sound, trying to disappear if I could, but you can't disappear in your own home, can you? Even a 10-year-old knows that much. Life at home got more complicated when Mom told us she was expecting. Jack already had a hard time tolerating me, and the news didn't exactly make him happy. He was silent for a long minute before he spoke, and when he did, his words were cold. Well, that's just great, Linda. Just what we needed, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Mom just smiled, but it was a weak smile. It's a blessing, Jack. You'll see, a fresh start for us. I felt a mix of excitement and dread. A little brother or sister seemed like a dream, someone new to connect with, but with Jack's mood swings, I wasn't so sure. The months flew by, and the baby finally arrived. It was a girl, and they named her Lauren. I was thrilled. She was so tiny, and when I first saw her, all wrapped up in her pink blanket, my heart melted. I thought having Lauren around might make things better, even make Jack soften up a bit. Holding Lauren felt magical. She was so small, her tiny fingers grasping at nothing. Hey there, Lauren, I'm your big sister, Mary. I'm going to take good care of you, I whispered, promising silently to be there for her no matter what. But the magic didn't last. Bringing Lauren home changed things again. Jack became fussier than ever, especially about money. One night, about a week after Lauren came home, I overheard him talking to Mom in the kitchen. His voice was harsh, louder than it needed to be. More expenses, Linda. Diapers, formula, who knows what else. And what about Mary? She's not even mine, and I'm paying for her too. Mom's voice was a quiet murmur. Jack, please, she's just a child. We can manage, things will settle down. It's not just about managing Linda, it's about priorities. We need to think about our family now, our real family. I knew what that meant. I wasn't real family. The sting of those words hit me hard. I slid down the wall by my door, hugging my knees, trying not to cry. The final straw came when Jack sat us down in the living room one evening. His face was serious, and he avoided looking at me. Linda, we need to think about the future. Mary's getting older, and expenses are piling up. Maybe it's time she went to live with her Aunt Joyce. It felt like a punch in the gut. Being sent away, just like that. Mom finally spoke, looking at me with sad eyes. Mary, honey, it might not be so bad. Aunt Joyce has a nice house, and you'll be well taken care of. But Mom, I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you and Lauren. The room went silent. Jack's next words were cold and final. It's decided then. I'll call Joyce in the morning. Moving in with Aunt Joyce was like stepping into a different world. Her house was big, clean, and always silent, too silent for comfort. The first day I arrived, she laid down her rules like we were negotiating a peace treaty after a long war. You'll follow my rules under my roof, Mary. No nonsense, no mess, no back talk, she declared as she led me through the hall to what would be my room. The room was plain, with bare walls and a single bed in the corner. It felt nothing like home. I nodded, too tired and upset to argue. Homework right after school, chores before dinner, and lights out by 8. I won't tolerate any laziness or sloppiness, you hear? Aunt Joyce continued, her voice firm. Yes, Aunt Joyce, I whispered. Speak up when you're spoken to. Let's have no mumbling here, she snapped. I quickly corrected my tone. Yes, Aunt Joyce, I understand. The days that followed blended into each other, each as strict and unforgiving as the last. Aunt Joyce was tougher than anyone I'd ever known. She had a way of making simple conversations feel like interrogations. Homework was a battlefield too. If I got a B instead of an A, Aunt Joyce had sharp words for me. You can do better than this. Your laziness won't fly here, she'd scold, even though I'd spent hours poring over books. The worst part was how she reminded me of my mom's decision to send me away. If I dared to talk back or ask for less criticism, she'd retort sharply, No wonder your mom sent you here. You need discipline. You obviously weren't getting it. Those words hurt. They always did. They made me feel unwanted, unloved, like I didn't belong anywhere. I was just another problem Mom solved by sending me away. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. I learned to keep my head down, do what I was told, and only speak when necessary. Aunt Joyce had no patience for tears or complaints, and I didn't have the energy left to fight. It's for your own good, she'd often say after scolding me harshly, as if her sharp words were supposed to make me into someone better. I wasn't sure who that better person was supposed to be. All I knew was that I was getting really good being alone, at being quiet, and at not being a problem. Because in Aunt Joyce's house, not being a problem was the best thing you could be. Living with Aunt Joyce was suffocating, and I found myself missing my mom more each day, even though I knew she had let me go without much of a fight. One afternoon, the feeling of missing her got too strong to ignore. Aunt Joyce was out, probably at her bridge club, and I knew I had at least a couple of hours before she'd be back. Her phone was always left on the kitchen counter, charging next to the fruit bowl. It seemed like my only link back to my old life. I hesitated for a minute before I picked it up. Dialing my mom's number was like muscle memory. I hadn't forgotten it, and maybe I never would. My heart raced as I heard the phone ring once, twice, then I heard her voice. Hello? Mom, it's me, Mary. There was a pause, a breath, maybe. Then, Mary, why are you calling? I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I just wanted to hear your voice. Another pause, longer this time. Then she spoke, cold and hard. You shouldn't have called. But Mom. Mary, listen to me. You need to stop this. I can't have you calling me. But why? I miss you, Mom. I miss home. When can I come back? Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was discussing the weather. You can't. That's done. Don't call here anymore. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, please. Just don't, Mary. There's nothing here for you. Goodbye. She hung up and the line went dead. The silence in the kitchen was overwhelming. I felt my hand shake as I put the phone back on the charger. The finality in her voice broke something in me. She didn't want me. She really didn't want me anymore. Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled to my room. I closed the door softly, not wanting to make any noise that might hint at my rebellion. I sat on the floor, my back against my bed, and let myself cry. The room felt smaller than ever, like a box slowly closing in on me. I heard the front door open and close, and Aunt Joyce's voice called out, "Mary, you better have finished your chores." "Yes, Aunt Joyce," I called back, quickly wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I didn't want her to see any signs of weakness. Weakness wasn't allowed here. I went to the kitchen to help with dinner, acting like nothing had happened, but inside, I felt different, emptier, more alone. Mom's final words kept playing over and over in my head. That night, Aunt Joyce found the call log on her phone. Her face twisted into a scowl as she stormed into my room, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the quiet. "So, you took my phone to call your mother. Thought you'd go behind my back." I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. I just wanted to hear her voice. Aunt Joyce laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "And what did that get you, huh? She doesn't want you, Mary. Even you can't deny it now." Her words were like ice, and I felt them chill me to the bone. She grabbed my arm, her grip tight and painful. "No more phone, no more pity parties. You're here because she doesn't want you. Remember that." The punishment was severe, more chores, stricter rules, and the cold shoulder from Aunt Joyce, who made sure I felt just how unwanted I was every day after that. Aunt Joyce's house had become a prison, each day dragging on heavier than the last. It was clear I was nothing but a burden to her, a nuisance she put up with only because she had to. But even that thin thread of obligation snapped one chilly morning, a year into my stay. "You're packing your bags today, Mary," Aunt Joyce announced over breakfast, her voice stern and final. I stared at her, my spoon halfway in my mouth. "What? Why?" "Your mother stopped sending money." "No money, no reason to keep you here," she replied bluntly, sipping her coffee as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. "So what happens to me now?" She shrugged, a cold, dismissive gesture. "Not my problem. You can go live with your grandmother. If she won't take you, then it's the orphanage." The thought of going to an orphanage terrified me, but the mention of Grandma sparked a tiny flicker of hope. I hadn't seen her since I was little, barely remembered her, but surely she wouldn't turn me away. Packing my bags felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. I was packing up my life at Aunt Joyce's, each item a reminder of the year I'd lost. Aunt Joyce drove me to Grandma's house, and the car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine. When we arrived, the house was smaller and cozier than Aunt Joyce's big, imposing place. Grandma was waiting at the door, her expression unreadable. "This is Mary, your granddaughter," Aunt Joyce said, not bothering with any pleasantries. "I can't keep her anymore. Linda stopped paying." Grandma looked me over, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I see, come in, Mary." Aunt Joyce didn't stay long. With a brief nod, she left, her duty to me discarded as easily as she had gotten rid of me. Inside, Grandma's house was warm and filled with the scent of cinnamon and something sweet baking. It felt welcoming, a stark contrast to Aunt Joyce's cold, sterile environment. "You'll be staying in the guest room. I suppose we'll need to sort out some more permanent arrangements," Grandma said as she led me down the hall. The guest room was small, with a window overlooking the garden. It felt safe, a feeling I hadn't associated with a place in a long time. "Thank you, Grandma," I said quietly, still unsure of my welcome. She nodded. "We're family, Mary. You belong here more than anywhere else." Over the next few weeks, I adjusted to life with Grandma. It was different. She was strict, but there was a kindness to her rules, a gentleness in her reprimands. You need to do your chores, Mary. Everyone contributes here, she would remind me, but her tone was patient, not harsh. Yes, Grandma, I would respond, grateful for her fair approach. Living with Grandma, I began to heal. I found comfort in the quiet routine of our days, the peaceful nights, and the steady rhythm of life that was so different from the chaos with Aunt Joyce. The months passed, and on my 19th birthday, Grandma made a decision that would change everything. Over breakfast, she slid an envelope across the table to me. Take a look at this, Mary, she said, her voice carrying a mix of seriousness and warmth. I opened the envelope and pulled out some official-looking papers. What's this? It's adoption papers, Mary. I want to adopt you. Make things official so no one can ever make you feel unwanted again, she explained, watching me closely for my reaction. I felt a lump in my throat. Really, Grandma? You mean it? Yes, I do. You're not just staying here, Mary. You're my family, and it's time we made that clear to everyone else, too. 2 weeks later, it was done. We went to court, and I officially became Mary Bennett, with a new sense of belonging that I had longed for since Mom sent me away. With Grandma's support, I finally felt like I was home. I began looking forward to the future, and Grandma encouraged me to focus on my studies, especially science, which had always fascinated me. You've got a sharp mind for it, Mary. You could go into medicine. How would you like that? She suggested one day as we were going over some of my school projects. I'd love that, Grandma. I want to help people, I replied, the idea starting to take root. Then it's settled. We'll get you into a good college program. I'll support you every step of the way, she declared with determination. True to her word, Grandma was there for me throughout my high school years. She tutored me in math and science, using her old-school methods that were strict but effective. You need to understand the basics, Mary. You can't skip the foundation. She'd insist whenever I struggled with complex problems. I graduated with top marks, thanks to her unwavering support. Grandma then helped me navigate the daunting college application process. When I got accepted into a medical college with a partial scholarship, she was as proud as if she'd received the acceptance herself. We'll manage the finances. Don't you worry about that, Grandma said when I fretted over the costs. You focus on your studies and become the best doctor you can be. Medical school was tough but fulfilling. I was drawn to oncology, the branch of medicine that deals with cancer. It was hard, both emotionally and intellectually, but it felt right, like I was exactly where I needed to be. I completed my degree, then my internship, and finally my residency, each step a milestone that Grandma celebrated. You're making a real difference, Mary. I'm so proud of you, she'd say, her eyes shining with pride. By the time I turned 35, I was fully established in my career as an oncologist. My life was busy but fulfilling, filled with long hours at the hospital and the satisfaction of knowing I was making a difference. Through it all, Grandma was my anchor, always there to listen and offer advice on tough days. But life, as it often does, threw another curveball my way. Grandma's health, which had been declining, took a sudden turn for the worse. It was swift and unexpected, the kind of decline that leaves you scrambling to catch your breath. I remember coming home one evening, tired after a particularly tough day at the hospital. Grandma was sitting in her favorite armchair, looking out the window. Her voice was weaker when she called me over. Mary, come sit with me for a bit, she said, patting the chair next to her. I sat down and took her hand in mine. It felt fragile, like it could break with too much pressure. I'm not going to beat around the bush, she started, her tone serious. The doctors say there's not much time left. We need to talk about practical things. A lump formed in my throat, and my eyes filled with tears. Grandma, please. She squeezed my hand, her grip still strong. No tears now, Mary. We've got things to sort out. You need to be ready. The next few weeks were a blur of doctor's visits, late nights, and legal paperwork. Grandma wanted to make sure everything was in order for me, that there would be no complications with her estate or her wishes. When the end came, it was peaceful. Grandma passed away in her sleep at home, just as she had wanted. The emptiness left by her passing was overwhelming, and the silence in the house felt too heavy to bear at times. Planning the funeral was hard. I went through her address book, calling relatives and friends. The responses were polite, some even warm, but it became clear that not many would make the effort to come. My heart ached, not just for the loss of Grandma, but for the loneliness of this farewell. The funeral day was quiet, the chapel more empty than full. I stood there, feeling oddly detached as the priest spoke about life, loss, and legacy. It didn't take long after the funeral for the past I thought I had left behind to come knocking at my door. My mother, stepfather, and their daughter, who was now 21 years old, showed up unexpectedly. My mother didn't waste any time. "Mary, you need to share the inheritance your grandmother left you," she demanded, her tone entitled. I stared at them, disbelief mixing with anger. "You left me, remember? 21 years ago, you decided I was too much of a burden." My mother's face twisted into a sneer. "Ungrateful girl. Now you're a rich doctor with an inheritance. You owe us." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Grandma adopted me legally. You're nothing to me now." The shock on her face was almost comical. My stepfather, ever the bully, leaned in. "You're going to regret this, Mary." As they left, I slammed the door behind them, the click of the lock sounding unusually satisfying. Standing there, my back against the door, I felt a mix of relief and renewed determination. A few days after their visit, I was at work when I got a call from a neighbor. "Mary, it looks like your family's at your house again. They've been bringing in furniture. It looks like they're moving in or something." When I pulled into the driveway, seeing their car parked out front made my stomach turn. I walked in to find my mother, stepfather, and stepsister unpacking boxes in the living room, acting like they owned the place. "What are you doing?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother turned around, feigning surprise. "Oh, Mary, we're just settling in. After all, this is family property." "No, it's not. This is my house, legally left to me by Grandma. You need to leave now." My stepfather stepped forward with a smirk on his face. "Make us. We're family, and we deserve a part of this house." I could feel the anger rising inside me. "You haven't been family for over 21 years. You can't just come here and claim what's mine." My stepsister, who had been watching from the side, finally spoke up. "Come on, Mary, don't be so heartless. We're just asking for what's fair." "Fair?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "What's fair about abandoning a child? What's fair about only showing up when you think there's money to be had?" They had no answers, just scowls and muttered curses. "I'm calling the police," I declared, pulling out my phone. My mother tried to stop me. "You'll regret this, Mary." "I've regretted knowing you for years. This is nothing new," I shot back as I dialed 533. The police arrived quickly. I explained the situation, showing them the legal documents proving my ownership of the house and Grandma's will. The officers were firm. "You need to leave," one of them told my mother and stepfather. "This property doesn't belong to you, and if you don't comply, you'll be removed forcibly." My stepfather glared at me, his anger clear, but there was nothing he could do. "This isn't over, Mary," he threatened as they gathered their things. "Oh, but it is," I replied, my tone cold and final. After they were gone, I walked through the house through Grandma's house. Each room was filled with memories, each corner a testament to her love and the life she had built here, a life she had fought to pass on to me. Standing in her favorite spot by the window, I made a promise, not just to her but to myself. I would not let the bitterness of the past tarnish my future. I had fought hard to become who I was, and I would continue to fight to honor her legacy and the sacrifices she had made for me.